Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody, wherever you are. This is the ARPA Institute panel discussion. Um, we will start by introducing the ARPA Institute activities in Armenia. And then I will introduce the moderator today, who will then introduce the panelists, and we will start. ARPA Institute, as you all may know, is an organization of experts from various fields, and we have been working in Armenia since 1992. Our activities involve advancing education, science, technology, healthcare, and many other areas. And we have, in the past, performed several different activities, established several different functions, and now we have programs ongoing in Armenia that we consider very important and impactful. One of them is the new clean room, a class 1000 clean room, which is the first in Armenia. And that will be used for experimentation in sensitive areas, material science, detection, detectors, and many other areas. And it has already started, and we are waiting now to improve the instrumentation. As you may know, clean rooms require quite a bit of advanced instrumentation, which are all very expensive, and we are trying to raise funds and acquire as many as we can. And then we have also our annual invention competition for young scientists, and we receive inventions in various fields. We send them out to experts, and they are evaluated, and then we select the winner, who then receives $10,000 to continue the work, and we guide them so they continue and even make it a commercial product if possible. We also have research programs, one in the Aleksandr National Lab, one in the Yerevan State University. They are researching in what is called confined light, where light is confined to nanoscale areas on silicon chips. And in that way, the silicon becomes a direct band gap material. Its natural band gap is indirect, and therefore it only absorbs a part of the light. But when we do it with the new approach, it absorbs all of the light, which makes it much more efficient. Our results now show that the efficiency goes from the regular commercially available silicon chips, the solar cells, from 22% up to 50 and even 60%. This makes it actually competitive with petroleum. And so part of that experimentation, the actual experimentation, is taking place in the clean room of the Aleksandr National Lab. And the theoretical part is being done by scientists in the Yerevan State University. We also have a detection lab in the Aleksandr National Lab, where they are trying to develop new detectors in nuclear physics and many other areas. We have also a new program in radio frequency photomultiplier tube, which is a gadget that can detect a laser pulse down to a picosecond accuracy. And that makes it a very much desirable application in many areas, including medical imaging, computers, microscopes, and other areas. We're working with the team in the Aleksandr National Lab to make this also a commercially available instrument. We also, of course, work with the universities and with the institutes of the Academy of Sciences, as well as the government of Armenia. We now also are establishing a new Center of Excellence for Circuit Design in the Polytechnic University, where the internationally used software from Cadence Company will be used to teach the students how to design microchips and also do research in the design areas. This will introduce Armenia into a internationally known software capabilities, which will then attract large companies such as AMD, NVIDIA, Apple, and so on. So our activities are in many different areas, and of course, we would welcome any donation to help us do more in Armenia. And now I would like to introduce the moderator first, Dr. David Joulfaian, who is a scientist, an economist, and he has been working in Armenia for quite a few years. He has helped establish the Armenian Economics Society, which is very active now in Armenia. They do seminars and other things. He is the author of many different articles in the US. He has been also active in the Treasury Department, and now he teaches in the university. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hagop. It's always a pleasure not only to see you, but also to contribute as much as I can to ARPA's activities. Yes, working with Armenia has been a long history, even though I'm US-based, and obviously my Eastern Armenian hasn't developed well enough, even though I'm married to one. It should get better, but I've always thought to myself as a student of the Armenian economy, first spending some time early on at the Ministry of Finance, and then teaching at Yerevan State University, which has incredible students, I would say. And then with the Economic Association. And I always thought of myself as being an expert on the Armenian economy. But over time, given the dynamics of the Armenian economy, you realize whatever you've learned is essentially is history. And the challenge is to keep abreast of developments there. And obviously, I'm no longer the expert I thought I am. Fortunately, we have three experts joining us today who could actually shed some light, or actually a considerable amount of light, on what's going on, as well as the challenges the country faces. We have three panelists. I'll do a quick brief introduction, and then I'll pass the floor to them. The first speaker today would be Vahan Kerobyan. I think most of you are familiar with him as the former Minister of the Economy. He's a mathematician, an entrepreneur, and a public servant who's done an incredible amount of work in the area. And the other two speakers, who I will introduce shortly later on, would be Dr. Rouben Indjikian, who currently teaches at Webster University in Switzerland, and Dr. Aleksandr Gevorkyan, who is the chair of the Econ Department at St. John's. Again, I'd like to start with Vahan, and then we can move the floor on to the rest. Vahan, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. And first of all, thanks to Hagop for inviting me tonight to speak for this esteemed audience. So, of course, many of you know the story about how I left my position and then the criminal case. And I would like to, actually, I would like not to touch it at all, but Just to brief you in 2 words, now the criminal case is in court, and actually there is nothing about any misdoing regarding any corruption, etc. So the only thing is, or any funds that are lost, public funds. So there is no public funds spent in this process, and there is no any misdoing about any of the public servants, including me, and actually my deputy, ex-deputy Ani Ispiryan, who has left Armenia, and actually the worst thing that I feel about all this story is that she came to Armenia from diaspora, like in 2022 during the wartime, and spent and actually has served with a full devotion to Armenia. And then at the end, this stupid case was brought forward to her, against her as well. And then after all, she left Armenia to other country. So this is the worst part of the whole story. And of course, I mean, the whole story, and if you know the environment in Armenia, I speak to many people, and there is a dramatic change in the public service sector after all this story, and all the I mean, decision-making process or any initiatives that were lacking even before the whole story. Now I would say that the public service sector is about to be paralyzed. Yes, so, I mean, no one wants to make decision, and I mean, no one wants to do things that Armenia really needs, just because they're afraid of being blamed of anything. So this is actually the I think that the impact is enormous. And actually, if we go smoothly to economic indicators, it is already obvious that the economy is not growing in the same pace as like last 3 years. And in May, we had 5.2% economic activity growth, which was the lowest in last 30 months. And it shows that of course there is a slowdown in the growth. So and if you go into the sectors of economy, of course we can see that IT sector has slumped dramatically, and it's 14% actually decline year on year for the first half of the year, and that's because I mean the influx of high-skilled professionals that we had enjoyed for the last several years, for the last 2 years, is turning down, and many of the professionals are leaving Armenia. The main reason, I think, is that we failed to adopt our environment for absorbing or for welcoming high-skilled and innovative entrepreneurs that are willing to come to Armenia and to set up businesses here. And just to give an overview of that, I mean, when the war started, we had McKinsey in Armenia, they offered us a pro bono project to create a strategy or to create a working paper on how we have to adopt our environment. And then they prepared a very nice piece of paper, actually. And then for many different reasons, that paper didn't go through and wasn't implemented. Although, I mean, there was a clear message from Prime Minister or to deputy prime ministers to execute that project. Anyway, so that's the first and the most worrying, actually, part of the economic developments that we have this year. And the other one, actually, which was predicted by us last year when and we showed Prime Minister that we will have a big problem with our mining sector as well. So if you look at the mining sector, it's also declining rapidly. It's more than 9%, I think, for the first half of the year. And the reason is that actually, despite the high prices of copper that the world sees, I mean, our whole mining sector is actually under sanctions. So I mean, no one speaks about that, but in reality, almost all mines are owned by sanctioned companies. I mean, it's either Russian-owned Geopromining, which is a sanctioned oligarch from Russia that owns the largest mines in Armenia. It's Zangezur copper and molybdenum company. It's Agarak copper and molybdenum company, and Sotk mine, which is a gold mine. So, and then Tehut is also under sanctions. It is owned by VTB Bank in Russia. So, and actually this is also very worrying. And last year we offered a solution to Prime Minister to take out mining sector from the sanctioned individuals, but it also didn't go through properly. So, and then of course the third and I think the most important from all of this is how we manage the situation with Artsakh refugees. So, of course, you probably have heard that government adopted a program to support Artsakh refugees with the housing program. But the issue is that, again, that when the whole thing started and we had to discuss how we move forward with adopting refugees or how we manage the whole situation. Again, we asked McKinsey, and again, they did a pro bono project for us. And they took the best experience from the world, like from Germany, Poland, Turkey, other countries that had recently a large influx of refugees. And they prepared a very nice program to make sure that we give jobs, we give houses for the refugees. To the refugees, we support them with social infrastructure, education, healthcare, and everything else, and ensure that in 2 years' time we manage to keep in Armenia at least 80% of all the people, and also 80% of the people who stay in Armenia should live outside Yerevan, and also 80% of the working age people should have work. So it was 380, 3 times 80 program. But then, and it was designed in a way that that it would contribute to GDP growth significantly. If you note, rating agencies reports from end of 2023, they all predicted a high growth of economy based on the assumption that the government will spend aggressively on the housing programs of the refugees. So if you read the S&P rating or rating report or Fitch rating report, you'll see that they all predicted that the government will go into the high spending. But in reality, the program that was adopted actually is, and the whole process, like supporting the rents and support of the utility payments. So all the programs were designed in a way that actually, in reality, they didn't contribute to the GDP growth at all. So, I mean, I'll bring an example. So in the current program, so they allow refugees to buy houses from the secondary market. And that means that actually, so the sale transaction in this secondary market actually doesn't add to GDP. But when you build a new house, and actually we need to build new houses because the house fund, actually, the houses that we have in Armenia are very old and they need to reconstruct it. So, in that case, we would have a significant GDP growth. So, the main idea that I want to share is that actually we could turn the situation with Artsakh refugees to fuel further GDP growth, but it didn't happen either. So these are main things, and as a result, I mean, in the first half of the year, and you may probably know that, I mean, we also have a significant deficit of the on the revenue side of the budget. So I think it was collected more than 9% less than it was planned. And it actually was 120 billion drams of deficit in the revenue side of the budget compared to the initial plan. So, and as a result of it, actually, Ministry of Finance adopted a midterm finance program, which is dramatically different from the initial plan. So, and actually, this is a cost-cutting medium-term finance program. Actually, they dramatically decreased the spending side of the coming years, 2025 to 2027. And it means that actually the prospects of the turning the situation to the positive is less probable than if we could stay with the initial plans of the spending on all sides, on infrastructure, on the housing programs, on the schools, kindergartens, reservoirs. I would also say that actually, if you compare what would be delivered on 2026 from the initial government plan, we will see very big differences. Like, for example, we promised 15 reservoirs, water reservoirs, and it's actually very important for Armenia because we have a big scarcity of water, and we'll build 0 out of this 15. So, and then from 300 schools, we just have 28 built for now, and just 43 which are under construction, or in the process. Maybe some of them is not under construction, is in design stage, but I mean, and all other main parts of the government program will be significantly misdelivered, I would say, yeah? Delivered less than initially planned. So, and that's the picture. I don't want to give a very sad picture, but because I'm now in a business that is actually an investment business, and I'm personally believing in the future of Armenia. And it's actually the business that I am is actually a continuation of what we are doing last 3 days. Actually, our main focus in our economic policy was to increase labor productivity, and we actually managed to bring. I think that anyways, labor productivity will be grown more than it was planned. But I mean, the business that I'm in is actually again a business that is related to labor productivity. So we'll be investing with our investors into the increasing labor productivity. So I mean, anyways, I think that despite the fact that many things that could be much better than it is now, we are confident, and I'm confident. I believe in the future of Armenia. So continue to invest or help to raise investments into real sector of economy. So I think that this is enough for the start, and I'll be happy to respond to the questions that someone that may have.
Yes, actually, how do you do? Ashod Spenjian from Lawrence NYC. I don't know if you can hear me. Yes.
When the question and answer time comes, you can ask your question, please.
Sure, gladly. When would that be?
They will. The moderator will let you know.
Very good. Thank you.
You know, since the issue came up, go for it, Ashod. Okay.
Vahan Jan, thank you so much for the recap. It was a sad day, I believe, when you left that position. You mentioned several things, of course. One of them was that you're currently involved in labor productivity growth. One thing, if I may touch on several things, you mentioned all the different issues with the public sector. Now, one thing that we at Lawrence NYC, which is a company that my sons and I started, we're based out of New York. We started 5 years ago, before the war, before COVID, with the intent of bringing manufacturing, outside manufacturing, to Armenia, introducing foreign brands, in our case, fashion brands, into Armenia to manufacture in the existing factories that are currently there. So the reason I touch on that is you mentioned about the difficulties with the public sector. What we have found is if we go directly to manufacturing facilities, business to business, and bring foreign orders into the country, manufacture in the country, export from the country, that will naturally, as we all know, bring in dollars, create jobs, keep the population in the country, keep the world's eyes on our country, so that if our neighbors decide to get unpleasant, you know, people have an interest in our country and will try and minimize the situation. So one way to circumvent the difficulties with the public sector is to go direct, business to business. And I think anybody that has any diasporan, I should say, that has any experience in any field should make the attempt to manufacture in Armenia. I'm basing this on my personal experience. I've been in this sector, the garment sector, the manufacturing sector, for 44 years. I started in the Far East, and I lived in Korea for 2 years in 1981 to 83, Taiwan, Hong Kong, all through the 1980s. And I saw how all these economies are based on the light industry. And on top of that is built everything else. You mentioned that the IT sector has declined somewhat. I think it should be replaced with manufacturing, simple light industry manufacturing, because any economy needs a manufacturing base. We cannot be solely a service sector or solely an IT sector. We need the manufacturing base. So I would recommend anybody and everybody that's listening, that's in any industry, to bring manufacturing into Armenia. We've had some successes, and we're building on those, and we have some upcoming successes as well. And specifically, I jumped on this because you mentioned about labor productivity. I'm interested to hear about how productivity is increasing, because ultimately in manufacturing, labor productivity is key. We have to compete against the Chinas and the whatnots in our ability, in our productivity. So I'm curious to see how we are doing that.
Thank you, Ashot. Vahan, how about you respond to Ashot's question? There are a couple of questions in the chat. You can respond to it. I know some of the speakers are pressed for time. So Vahan, do your best to respond to them, and let's move on to the next panelist, and then we can try to respond to as many questions as we can. Okay. Again, thanks, Ashot.
Thank you, Ashot. So, I mean, manufacturing was also in our focus, and I was just rereading our reports that we have on our manufacturing side, like from ministry time, because I use this information now. One of the major programs, actually, how we tried to increase labor productivity. It was like several programs that we adopted, and they were extremely successful. So the most influential one, I would say, is called the Economy Modernization Program, and we supported companies to modernize their equipment, and more than 3,000 companies were beneficiaries, so the idea was that government was subsidizing all interest expenses for buying new equipment, it is the most successful program of the government, I would say, because our portfolio was like more than $500 million. At the time I left, it was like in 2 years' time we were able to help companies to renew their equipment for $500 million, which is actually very substantial for Armenia. And then the other program was subsidizing salaries of high-skilled professionals, and that was also a good one. And more than 400 individuals were brought to Armenia, to different companies, to support their productivity growth, and the government was subsidizing part of their salary. And the third one actually is a digital transformation program, supporting companies with grants and subsidies to transform themselves digitally, because we found out that more than 90% of Armenian companies were not digitally mature. So now I speak to different consultancy firms that offer such services to Armenian companies, and it's moving on as well. So these are I am particularly in the leverage buyout private equity business now. So we find companies of a medium size that have value creation potential inside them. So we are in the beginning. Of course, we didn't have any deal for now, but it's moving on, and we have a very nice deal flow. So the idea is that we buy companies, bring in a professional management, convert it or transform it to a better company, and then after some time we sell these companies to strategic investors or to someone else. So that's the business that I'm in, and it's moving very good. So I think that the only question that I have, or we have two questions in the chat. So I think that why we couldn't keep IT professionals was just the inability of the government to execute the program that was prepared by McKinsey. So and the reason for that inability is actually was I can't say why. I mean, the main reason I think was that the minister for high-tech industry for that time was not very much interested in doing that. I don't know why, but I mean, it didn't happen. So I can't comment more than that. And of course, regarding USAID and Artsakh refugees, so they were very happy that government was able to prepare a plan with McKinsey. But then, I mean, so initially we planned to adopt the McKinsey plan, let's say so, by the end of the 2023. But then again, for different reasons, it was postponed. I think that some of the government officials were not very courageous to go for this bold program, and then they just stretched the whole program to 10 years. I don't know how many refugees can stay without home for 10 years until they start building their homes. But I mean, it was stretched. And I think that now USAID just trying to be helpful with the program that is currently in place. So that's the answer for that question.
Thank you, Vahan.
Yeah.
I know you're pressed for time, but do your best to stick around as long as you can in case we have any more questions. I
think I will stay.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. But you know, kids are more important, so just do your math, okay? Okay, let's. The next panelist is Dr. Rouben Indjikian. Ruben, you're around? Just to make sure.
Yes.
Okay, you are. Okay, great. Ruben is currently a professor of economics, business, and management at Webster University in Geneva. He has a long distinguished career at the United Nations Trade and Development, and he's written and worked hands-on extensively in the areas of trade, finance, and digital economy. It's my pleasure to turn the floor to you, Ruben. It's all yours.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Vahan, for your intervention, which was very valuable one. And I would like to say that all my life in UNCTAD, which is now called UN Trade and Development, we were believing in the active role of government in economic development, unlike Washington Consensus. And since 90s, I was insisting at then very liberal Armenian government that still they should do some industrial policies. And since 2000s, when I was the head of e-commerce, I was stressing to Armenian governments and ministers of economy that the era of internet economy is bringing a unique opportunity for Armenia, given its historical background of being a Silicon Valley in Soviet Union, bring back its capacity to develop export of everything which can be digitized and sent through internet or intranets. In a way, and I was, Vahan mentioned Mackenzie, I was active participant in Armenia 2020 when with Nubar Afeyan in 2003 in Athens, we were writing Singapore's scenario for Armenia. And in 2005, last conference where main speaker was Mackenzie, Rouben and Nubar asked me to give the sort of second big presentation where I advocated this approach, and then went and give to the Minister of Economy and Deputy Minister my recommendations. So basically, criminalizing entrepreneurial minister who is pro-growth and trying to help businesses is a big mistake, because unless they are, if you prove that they are not outright corrupt, and if they do some active steps and can overspend, they should not be terrorized by the people who are in charge of the legal system. And that should be not only because of their training, but it should be a consensus within the society and including government, but that we should do something with the development of our country and the possibilities of exporting through new ways of fourth industrial revolution technologies needs some industrial policies, of course, active, and at the same time is a unique opportunity for Armenia. I will give you a few ideas from my presentation, which I prepared here, basically. So basically, Armenia, as I said, had comparators, and I compare it with historically Switzerland, Israel, Ireland, and Cyprus. And I stress that the share of IT and software services in the economy are increasing, and they are improving overall export competitiveness of the economy. They can do insourcing offshore services. They can help export of services and goods. And in goods part, I insist, there was a question raised that manufacturers can save Armenia. I would still stress that services can save Armenia. And in manufacturers part, I would stress that Armenia can only develop the production of high value added and light manufacturures, which can be transported by air given our geographical situation. Okay, and then I will say a couple of words. Here I speak about Armenia during all its periods, okay? But in the 2020s, I am saying that still Armenia has a situation where this huge, still the really important exports are representing these parts 40 and 30%, and this very recent increase in export was a positive shock due to the geopolitical situation of relocants and a re-export of mainly gold through Armenia to Emirates and to China, Hong Kong. So, and these kind of big increases are unsustainable, in fact. What is sustainable is the hard work on increasing the capacity of country, mainly to develop export of services. which is at a quite advanced stage compared to early 2000s. And in spite of all these setbacks, lack of understanding, misfortunate events, as happened with Vahan, at the end he said that he still believes in his country. I also believe in Armenia, and I hope that it will basically manage to become an important exporter of services. Now, concerning in the conversation there, Vahan mentioned also that IT people are leaving. It seems to me that Yerevan and Armenia is becoming not only, an arithmetical addition of different IT companies doing their own stuff and sending to their clients, but these people who are working, they can have a sort of a Silicon Valley culture. In other words, in Silicon Valley, they work in the evening, they go to pubs, and each of them is telling about his successes, and sometimes others are listening and trying to copy the success of the. So they can move from one company to another, and it is not thus making the country a center of innovation and active development of businesses, which gives the possibility of creation and thriving of local companies. You see, not only there are research and development centers for Microsoft, NVIDIA, and my good friend from Synopsys is a very good example of success of development of that company. It's one of the leaders, but there are many other companies, and it's becoming a linked network, like a LinkedIn. They know each other, and they talk to each other. In that case, it will be difficult for them to just, yes, relocants from Russia, they came, they looked their place, but I think the bringing foreign labor, skilled labor in IT sector can be kept by making them a part of that network, integrating them into the this society of advanced companies. To answer to this question of why services, I was at the 60th anniversary of UNCTAD, and they invited one of the famous macroeconomists and specialists of international trade, Richard Baldwin of IMD, and at his to speak at UNCTAD 60th anniversary. And one of his theses was that we are living in a new world where the most dynamic part of the world economy are ICT-enabled services, and that and manufactured export are much less dynamic, and FDI is also becoming less important. And we have elements in manufacturing of reshoring. We have new technologies where they can no more rely on outsourcing and producing in the regions with lower labor costs. So we are in a new stage. And that, I said I should put this graph in my presentation at ARPA because it is what I am saying since 2005 for Armenia. And now Richard Baldwin is speaking about the world economy as such. Okay, so basically what I'm proposing is to continue developing the IT services and software expert, try to enter into the business of goods which can be produced at the end of the supply chain out of digitable schemes which are will be created in Armenia. And of course, that will demand investment in Armenia, and I think that foreign direct investment and portfolio, and especially venture capitalists, will be important for Armenia, because in Armenia, unfortunately, we still have a very expensive credit, and the real interest rate is very high, and the banks are acting as a sort of providers of very dear finance to enterprises. So in this case, the industrial policies of government giving special fiscal, financial, and trade incentives to the producers of goods and services is becoming an important way to invest into the economy, because enterprises by themselves cannot go to banks and say, give me a credit, when the bank is asking 12 to 14%, you know, and while the inflation is 3%. There should be a real difference between inflation and credit of 3, 4, maximum 5%, but not more. Unfortunately, it is not still the cases. And as I said, small and very high value added goods can be also a direction of export strategies. Then I go into the other sectors of economy, in other words, not the production of goods and services, but also sectors such as business and financial services. For example, Cyprus was famous for that, and Armenia can also become, given its stable financial system, can become a center for business and financial services to the businesses from CIS region, Middle Eastern region. And of course, we have a very thriving Christian, based on early Christianity and rich cultural heritage tourism. This we should further develop. And I also want to mention two things: that Armenia has very good doctors. And I know a very good surgeon from Moscow who is now in Aleksandr working, and I try to help him to create a center there. So we can export medical services to foreign patients, okay? And that will be a part of medical tourism. And we can also give education to the students from the third world. I remember how the Indian students of medical school in medical institute were speaking in Armenian, but the same Indian students can come to Polytechnic. And in fact, I have an idea also that apart from being very closely linked to US, which is the center of the world digital economy, and it is very good, we should also develop our digital business contacts, especially with India, which is the leader in export of IT services, and bring maybe students from India to study in Armenian Polytechnic and make them a part of Armenian skilled labor force. So basically, that is my main messages. And then, of course, I am speaking what the government should do, what the central bank should do, and how the industrial policies, which are giving financial, trade, and fiscal incentives to produce these goods and services and create thus a new export potential is a core element of this whole strategy. In other words, the government is important, and the government officials, entrepreneurial officials should come back, bring back their spirit, which our dear Vahan had, and now he is a bit discouraged. But I hope the cycle of this importance of the role of government will come back, and people like him will again take serious positions and can take serious decisions in industrial policies. That is basically my main messages. concerning Armenia, what should be done. And so the others are less important, so I stop here.
Thank you, Ruben. One quick question, if I may. I am familiar with the work you've done with Nubar and with the Singapore scenario and more or less what you have in your presentation. The big question I had then, and still do, is that who are the enablers? So you have these great ideas and you want to move the country from point A to point B, and you want the government to do it. The question is, do you have the human capacity? Do you have these enablers, skilled enablers, managers, financial wizards, whatever you want to call, who would make these things happen? I mean, great ideas. The Armenia 2020, Nubar's talk in 2005, your work here. I just don't see how you move the needle despite these great ideas.
David, if I may.
Yes, I let Vahan to answer.
Actually, I mean, because I had a business that was in several markets, and I had an opportunity to work in different countries, I realized that the biggest asset of Armenian nation are people that are outside of Armenia, actually. People who are working in the sophisticated markets, that are professionals in the modern economies, and if we bring them back to work for Armenia, that would really be helpful. So and if you notice in my work, I was very proactive in bringing people from diaspora to work in the Ministry of Economy. For example, my deputies were from Russia, from Luxembourg, chair of the tourism committee was from Canada, and I was very welcoming people from abroad, and I could say that they were really very successful. So if we take tourism, for example, last year we had a record number of tourists, 2.4 million tourists, and this year there is a decline there too. And again, I mean, I fully agree with Ruben that if we create a business-oriented public sector, and I can see, like in UAE, if you go there, I mean, ministers are amazing, and all of them are very business-minded, and they are really working as like company CEOs, and it's and you can see how UAE is growing right now. Actually, Ruben, I would like you to include also UAE case in the.
Yeah, it's my son is in Dubai. It's amazing. I was a speaker at the e-commerce conference organized by OECD in 2001 in Dubai Internet City and in Burj Al Arab. And the main participant was the Sheikh Maktoum there. And I had a chance to talk to him, saying that he's a very visionary leader. I mean, in 2001, and I visited my son after 20 years. I mean, a huge difference, huge. You are very right.
So, David, so responding to your question, there is a solution there, and I shared what kind of solution I see. But also, I want to respond to Ruben's remark about real interest rate. Of course, this was our main debate with Central Bank of Armenia because they are extra conservative. If you take historical data for real interest rate, which is a difference between central bank base rate and inflation average rate that is in the country. Armenia is actually one of the most conservative countries in the world, or the most conservative. So the difference is the largest if you compare like a 10-year historical data, Armenia data with other countries' data. So on average, our real interest rate difference between central bank rate and inflation was 4%, while the average for the world is actually 0% or close to not more than 1%. So which makes doing business extremely difficult. But again, in our economy modernization program, Ruben, we actually subsidize the difference. So and taking credits, taking loans for modernizing equipment became very cheap, and companies, of course, use that moment to modernize their machinery, plant, etc.
And that is what industrial policy is about.
Yeah.
But just one, David, I think Vahan said that he had deputy ministers, in other words, well-educated Armenians from Armenia, first of all, but also Armenians born in other countries and who got good education working there. But this the idea of government playing an active role in modernization of the economy for a long time was not popular, because Washington consensus was saying markets will do everything, do not interfere. And Ashod Spenjan said, do not go to governments, do business to business. It is a mistrust of the government officials, which I understand well, because they are not performing well. So unless you have a developmental state, not a predatory state, which is corrupt, but developmental state, which is pushing its own entrepreneurs to become stronger and be more competitive in exporting, it's a process. And maybe, as Vahan suggested, these good elements coming into the ministries can be the answer to that question, positive answer to that question. Let's hope so, that they will, the critical mass of these people will permit to make our government a developmental state in good terms of its meaning.
Yeah, thank you, Ruben. And again, thank you, Vahan. Let me move to our third panelist. And obviously, if you have any more questions, we can follow up after his presentation. And our panelist, the third speaker, is Dr. Aleksandr Gevorkyan. He's at St. John's University in New York, and he's the chair of the econ, and he's the chair of the econ department. Some of you know Alec, I presume. He is well published in many areas of economics. He's better known lately in terms of his publication on transition economics, and more in the news on his diaspora writings. So, Alec, it is my pleasure to give you the floor. I don't see you, but hope you take over whenever you are.
I'm up here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I see you very well.
Okay. Thank you, David. Thanks to ARPA Institute for the invitation back in April or May or June, long time ago. And we found the date. And to all the co-panelists and everyone on the call. It's hard to follow what's been said, but I'll try. And it helps that I've prepared notes. So I will share my screen and we'll just go with that. Otherwise, I'll just get sidetracked, because so many interesting questions were raised, and I'd like to actually address them. And starting with the industrial policy, which is one of the key topics. So it's actually a good transition into my work. Hopefully you can see the screen on transition economies. So what I often point out when I give talks, and some of those who know me and have been to my talks already probably know, is that Armenia is not even Georgia. And this goes both ways. One, in terms of it's very high level, sort of macro level income levels. If we look at the dotted line as the 1990 standard, GDP per capita, sort of income per person in the country, and we take that as sort of the benchmark, Armenia is up here, right, and doing relatively well. However, as early as 2000, it wasn't reaching that level. So you can see how other countries sort of stack up. And of course, the past 2 years, or really I have just 2024 as a forecast, is the byproduct of the events since 2022, 23, which I'll also address in a moment. You can see encircled some other countries, including neighboring Georgia, which is still trying to get back into things. And Armenia would have been very close to Georgia in that regard on this macro scale if it hadn't been for diaspora, right? There's an often repeated estimate, which many of you know, some time ago was, maybe it was just taken out of thin air, but it sounds correct. Something between 60 to 70% of foreign direct investment into Armenia has been brought in by diaspora businesses. So that's the good news. But otherwise, all of the highly centralized republics that relied specifically on the logistics of and production lines of the Soviet and socialist system, these are the ones that are circled in here. And these are the ones that are experiencing the sort of the most difficulties in terms of finding their new development model. And that is really the theme that I would like to suggest as sort of my research, which I started working on this back in February 23 when I was visiting American University of Armenia and wrote up a short piece on that. In any case, but that's still the good news as far as Armenia goes and compared to others, right? The next thing is the ninth wave, really. And we have global shocks. I'll try to be brief in the interest of time. So if you want me to go back to anything, happy to. And so we have the uniform shocks, which are global, right? The COVID pandemic and the global economic slowdown with the massive geopolitical tensions, then the restructuring of global value chains. And that is essentially bringing the business back or bringing manufacturing back. Somebody has their mic on in the advanced economies. And that is impacting all of the smaller economies, and Armenia is not an exception in this case. So when we talk about manufacturing, yes, it's great to hear this, but then how do we fit into this global value chain process? And I think it's important to consider the question of logistics in the Armenian case. Then there are the local crises, which are specific, and paper was written in general on post-socialist economies, but for Armenia, there's no need to repeat this, quite obvious. And then internal specific shocks. And that's, I think, is more interesting to talk about and appreciate. And the two panelists before me have already outlined some of the high points of that. But I think that story is somewhat missed in the diaspora, because in the diaspora discussions, there's a tendency to, and it's fine probably, but to emphasize the positive sort of, okay, we have a unicorn this, a unicorn that, and I lost count of the unicorns now. But what is actually happening on the ground is a little bit less so positive, perhaps. So this is a report from the World Bank, and what's incredible is that the World Bank is reporting this, right? The decline in growth has already been reported in the first presentations. The dominance of precious metals in exports composition, right, is quite obvious. None of these are sort of structurally helpful for the broader economy, and we will get to the labor force numbers in a moment as well. Then since 2022, we've also seen rise in dram's appreciation, right? And that connects with the question on interest rate, because the central bank, yes, generally addresses questions of inflation, but for a country like Armenia, which is a typical developing economy, questions of foreign exchange are dominant as well. So the explanations for the appreciation of currencies when the rest of the emerging markets were seeing the loss of value of their currencies are quite obvious, right? So there are labor migrant remittances, and this is looking at this group of countries, Tajikistan primarily. Armenia is no longer a remittance-dependent economy. Remittances are barely 10% from pure labor migrant transfers. But it was in 2022 and 23, the individual relocations, corporate trade relocation. So this is affecting both Armenia and Georgia at the different sort of pace, though. Sorry, my mouse keeps jumping. There we go. In different intensity, but also the increased trade. And by the way, the fact that there's this increased trade is quite evident, right? However, it doesn't really translate in the foreign direct inflows, which would be great as well. And all of this I'm building up towards somewhat domestic structural questions that need to be addressed, that need to be brought up, and need to be researched. And this has to be done by local economists. This has to be done by Armenian economists who are familiar with context of the country, even if they may be abroad. No consulting company or for all their great sort of analytical capacity, multilateral agencies are capable of capturing the nuances of this. And here's the nuance number one. I call it a two-tailed narrative. There's a clear jump in wages. I'm comparing here, again, lots of charts I can explain, but the story is that I'm comparing the wages, I think these are average monthly wages, by sector to June 2018. This is the data that I have from Armstat. So that's sort of, you can like it, dislike it, but that's what we have. And we have three sectors that show strong growth, right? We have information technologies, that's the IT, financial sector, understandably so, it will always grow, and the arts and entertainment. And really, this is the entertainment part in here, if you dig a little bit deeper. When I saw these numbers first, well, I had the intuition, but then I put the numbers together and the graph. I worked for some time at the New York City Council as a senior economist. These are the exactly same graphs that we did for New York City. We saw strong growth in wages in some of these sectors. Moreover, we can also talk about employment, and this is just growth, right? And again, IT shows strong growth. So that's something to celebrate probably if we're thinking about digital economy and Baldwin's fourth industrial revolution idea, which is interesting, but it's good for advanced economies, but emerging markets are a slightly different story. But then you come to actual employment, and that's where I have the greater concern. And in this case, here's the nominal wage in the IT sector. It's over 1 million drams a month, right? But it only employs 32,000 people. And this data is as of June this year. The largest sectors where we see formal employment is wholesale, retail, trade, education, manufacturing. If we're talking about building capacity, building the public service cadre or something like this, it is this sector. If we talk about industrial policy, it is this sector that matters most and most of all. However, wages in this sector are 10 times less than in this sector, right? And if we look at a little bit further, there's something known as the informal employment, which is not part of the statistics, but it is reported by this statistical agency. And the data shows that actually close to 40-something% is in the informal employment, with majority in agricultural sector, which is, again, at the very low wages. So we have this second story or second tale, which is saying that, sure, there are wages that are growing in some sectors, but you have majority of the country employed in low wage sectors. And this is a concern, right? This is where, sure, I agree, I think, to some extent, that conversation on industrial policy could help, or strategic, don't call it that, call it, because it evokes among some colleagues unpleasant ideas, but in terms of what this means as far as state intervention and such, but some type of a strategic plan is probably needed. There's actually something else I'd like to add, and I'll try to be very quick. If we look at the wages in terms of regions, there's a massive divide, right? There's Shushanik, and this is really just what, one or two places, and even that, I think this confirms the comments at the beginning of the conversation that like said what was it, Kajaran or Zangezur Malvdanum, one of them, is under sanctions, right? So wages are actually declining and approaching Yerevan's level. But you could see the spread across the region. Then there was a question, and I just threw this as other panelists were speaking into the deck about the Artsakh refugees. This is another interesting thing that we do read and follow and kind of accept advice that is non-Armenian generated advice. Back in early October, I put together a few points on, and don't consider this as self-promotion, but just sort of wanted to mention that, and in a very non-technical way, explaining the best way of absorption the Artsakh refugees, right? In a way that it would be contributing back to Armenia's economy and strength of the economy. And one of the critical things was, of course, job creation, but learning from the experiences of countries that had experienced massive migration and situations, and the sort of the spread of those examples is vast. It's from Israel's absorption of immigrants in the early 90s to the effects of Hurricane Katrina. And there what we learned was that breaking up communities led to massive psychological and economic traumas for people affected by that. So keeping communities together, even in rural areas, would be paramount here. But let's move on. Again, this just dropped in as a reaction. What we have, though, I'm almost concluding here. What we have, though, is on a country scale is a significant concern in terms of inequality. We have the fast-growing sectors, and I'm not here to tell you which sector is right or wrong, but we need to understand the risks and sort of the opportunities in each of them. But it is this fast-growing sectors, and what happens in these situations when inequality sort of is so persistent across different regions. We've seen this in the 90s with the outward labor migration, but also even if people don't migrate outside of the country, though some sectors may be enriching, the spending doesn't really take place within the country, or put it simply, the rich spend outside. You don't have to read this whole thing, but these are some points I picked up from the World Bank reports. And the World Bank went from pronouncing Armenia to be the Caucasian tiger as the fastest growing economy in, almost in the entire post-socialist region in 2007 to their latest assessment, and many of you have seen this one just recently, on talking about unlocking potential. But really what they're talking about is structural challenge. I'd like to summarize with just 3 points here. Oh, 3 slides. Number one is the summary of what I just said. I've shown this in several presentations in Armenia, but I think we have a bit more of an outside Armenia audience here, may be interesting as well. And I'm generalizing this to a small country, but this fits basically all my small country work is based on the situation in Armenia. And so we have the global and local risks or pressures, however you define them. But we also have a concern about capital market development. For example, when we talk about industrial policy, the question is how to fund this. If we point to Singapore, please don't. It's not a good example. If we point to South Korea, well, maybe, but then we need to figure out how we're going to fund it and how to sustain the dual exchange rate system, which South Korea maintained. And also, are we ready to tolerate the concept of chaebols, of family businesses? Because all of these names, either in South Korea or Japan, are the last names of family owners that run them. In Japan, let's say Toyota or any one of them. So does that fit the model? But the ultimate question really is being able to fund that idea, that strategic policy. And this is where maybe the diaspora could play a role, but it's very speculative, right? So we have the macroeconomic base that needs to be developed. Manufacturing is certainly sort of this tangible sector that we recognize and appreciate and sort of makes sense, but it doesn't really have to be that. I'm not disagreeing. If it works, it works, but it could be sort of a portfolio of sectors that are growing together. Because if people are leaving the country due to social and economic underdevelopment, if you follow the forums of the people, the IT specialists, but also just the families that came with them from Russia, in Armenia, these are the most common discussions. Most common concerns are cost of living and the type of living that they're encountering, right? And it's a competition, as someone mentioned. Silicon Valley lifestyle allows people to move outside of the country very quickly. So those risks are very critical. And lastly, it's the supply chain repositioning, what it is that we can offer to the world and how in terms of competitive advantage. Some time ago, I wrote up 5 scenarios for development. And to summarize the discussions before, the industrial policy is the big push protectionism. Can we manage that? Very difficult. The second is to integrate with the largest existing trading partners and economic unions. And we have to be realistic here because geography dominates anything that happens in Armenia. And if we sort of somehow mysteriously forget that, that's incorrect. Remember, most of the, I shouldn't say most, but the large portion of country's labor force is still working on the land in agriculture. So it matters. Third is just to leave things as they are and hope somehow, things develop. The fourth and fifth are the more speculative ones. The diaspora, fifth element, so-called, I wrote a study for the IOM Armenia on diaspora engagement. And these 5 points came up, and this is the last slide. In the discussions with people I interviewed for the report, everyone understands that there's diaspora potential, and this was mentioned in the discussion as well. I myself write on the diaspora, as David mentioned, and I jumped into that field simply because the whole diaspora engagement has become very popular outside of Armenia, but Armenia is nowhere being mentioned. There's talk about development in Scotland with help of diaspora, development of Ireland with help of diaspora, Australia, New Zealand. I'm not mentioning the countries you would think I should be mentioning because it's the rich economies that are actually capitalizing on their diaspora, and they're learning from, as they tell me directly in the conversations, from Armenia's examples. So there's something that we should be paying attention to, and we should be reading and supporting, sorry to make the statement maybe, but supporting our scientists and the output that we are producing, right? So there's persistent divisions within the diaspora, and they're going to only perpetuate unless we break those boundaries through various different programs of engagement. And the list should be in pages and pages and pages of different types of initiatives. Otherwise, it ends up being short-lived, sort of altruistic involvement, and very quickly it dies out. So I think I tried to be brief because I'm last and probably standing in front of someone's coffee break. But these are the thoughts in general on macro conditions, macroeconomic conditions in the labor market. And David asked me to mention diaspora, so on diaspora as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Alec. There's a benefit to being last because you would be remembered the most. So,
all right, that's cool.
So kudos for that. I have a couple of questions, but before I do that, is anybody interested in asking any questions to Alex or the other panelists?
May I again respond for the presentation of maybe I'm misusing my ex-role, but
no, absolutely go for it. Absolutely go ahead.
First of all, Aleksandr, it was like a very nice presentation and to the point. I fully agree with the presentation, and it's actually no comments on the contents or thinking. So just several things. Yeah, I mean, first of all, there is a myth regarding about Armenia not having money for doing different things. Yeah. So again, I mean, the main idea is that actually, according to government program and according to standards in the governance of public finances, I mean, Armenian stated, or the government, or the winning party of the election stated that they will keep government debt to GDP ratio at 60% or less level. So which means that actually, as of now, our government has extra fiscal space of $3 billion that they can invest in different sectors wherever they find it useful. So, and that would actually fuel, you can imagine, largely economic growth in different areas. So the government has that freedom as of now. Our country is not under a heavy debt burden, so they can find a way to invest in different sectors wherever they want. But actually, again, we talked about a very conservative central bank, so we also have to speak about very conservative Ministry of Finance. So they try to keep the debt government at low. They don't want to invest in the development of the economy, and that's a big problem. So the other thing that I wanted to comment was about the role of Armenia in the current world. And I think that Armenia, as we used to be for several centuries, we have to take the role of being a bridge between different fragments of the world economy, and also, you know, that the economy of the world is deglobalizing or fragmenting. So, and then we can take a role to be a bridge between Eurasian Economic Union, Middle East, China, India, Europe, etc. So, and we can take that role. So it's in our blood, and now we have that opportunity. So, and then about how we can do that. And actually, of course, we are in Eurasian Economic Union, but if it again look at what UAE is doing, so they are in GCC, but also they go and sign free trade agreement with many countries, India, China, and many other countries. I mean, although they had to go, I mean, in their economic signing trade agreements with their economic union, but they're doing that at their own, alone. And they say, okay, Saudi doesn't want, but we have to do it in our national interest. So, and they go and sign. So Armenia can take the same steps, irrespective of the Eurasian Economic Union limitations. So we can go like and sign free trade agreement with China, India, Middle East countries, European countries. So we were about to sign with Europe free trade agreement, and we still can go for that while being in Eurasian Economic Union formally. So, and that would give us very big opportunities to connect different fragments of the world. So, of course, I can comment also on the agriculture. So, you know, the situation was that we are trying to also make agriculture more efficient. So with our programs like incentivizing agriculture, making it bigger, and taking out people out of the agriculture and directing them into other sectors of economy where we have a labor shortage, like construction and other sectors of economy, that will also help increase people's income and also fuel economic growth in the areas that we really need the labor force. So, and we were on that way and quite successful, I would say. Consolidation of land was going in a quite active pace, and all other initiatives, agricultural programs were also going quite good. So this is mainly my comments on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vahan.
Alec,
we have some more questions. Do you want to answer this one, or do you want to wait for the other questions too?
Okay, but I just have 10 seconds.
Okay.
Really.
Sure, go ahead.
On the first point, in terms of not having or having the money, that's interesting. But I think it's also a question about how money is spent, right? So the strategic vision, because that is essentially what happened in the countries that I mentioned. And that's how the money was found, because it went to specific uses in terms of subsidized loans or dual exchange rate systems and things like that. But also, very importantly, benchmarks, right? If you remember the 90s and you've seen the Hyundai from the 90s, you would know that the Hyundai from the 90s is the exact replica of Honda Accord ages before, right? So the task was to learn by doing, and this is a very common sort of idea in development economics. Does this mean we need to repeat this? That's a different question, but at least that's how South Korea built its brand. And the second, on Armenia being sort of the intermediary, that is the whole point with that second bullet point that I mentioned, sort of the strategic relationships with trading partners. And if that can work, that's essential, because when the Eurasian Union was created, and there were Armenian investment forums and such in New York, that's what people were talking about, sort of getting into the bigger market through Armenia. But I can't say that materialized. And with agriculture, we also know that quite a bit of that informal economy is not just agriculture as we're imagining it to be, but it's industries or sectors around agriculture, even opening a store. But the problem there is over indebtedness, right? And microcredit, which is pushing people into more debt. But let's go to the next questions.
Yeah, we have, I'm not sure how to do this. We have Nazaret Gevorkyan. You're still, do I do this, Agop, or do you do this?
No, go ahead. Yeah, you're in control.
Okay, how do I, Nazaret, the floor is, Gevorkyan, the floor is yours if you want to. Okay, you are, good.
Right. Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sure.
Sorry, apologies. I cannot switch on my camera. For some reason, it's asking me to quit and then rejoin, but I don't want to, switch away from this conversation. Alex, super interesting slides and numbers. One of the slides that's really struck me was about that, the inequality between the wages and then the employment, right? So you said the IT had, I don't know, the highest, maybe 4 times the other sectors, but the education and the manufacturing and the other sectors had much lower income. In your studies, have you touched upon other, let's say, equivalent economies? And if yes, that had the same problem or similar problems, and if yes, what actually they have done to overcome that, and what lessons can we learn? Because one of the, let's say, very obvious thoughts that I have, like, what can we do so that we bring all the other sectors to the IT one, right?
To the level of the IT sector. This is true to a lot of post-socialist economies. And you'll see anything from Bulgaria to others where they talk about the rise of their tech sector. And again, it's very disproportionate. But I'll give you another idiosyncratic example, and that's New York City, because that's what I mentioned. That's what we found back 12, 13 years ago, that financial sector was growing, and it accounted for 30 or even more percent of the total New York City's wage pool. But it was barely 10% of New York City's employment. In other words, most of the residents of the city work for education, healthcare, lower paying jobs. And the difference, though, here, which Armenia doesn't really have this advantage, is New York City's massive budget, which is funded from various taxes, and making it super expensive city to begin with to live in. And it's sort of going by until something bigger happens. But that's not a sustainable solution. And people realize this, but very little can be done. The other problem with the financial sector, which is similar, in my opinion, to the IT sector in Armenia, is that most of the financial professionals working in New York City, earning wages in New York City, live outside of the city, nearby neighborhoods or somewhere else. And in the case of the, we're picking on the IT sector, but we can talk about financial sector as well in Armenia, which is also high wage. But the concern there is that, again, this is sort of a disconnected lifestyle from the rest of the real economy, because spending is happening online on Amazon products or things like that, and very little is spent on local products. And that is now a classical example in economics. So how have other countries resolved this? It comes back to, again, sort of, well, one way is they continuously to subsidize lower income and create various different state-funded programs. From what I understand, for example, healthcare is one of the areas that may need such a support, because it's, despite there being really great doctors, basic healthcare is extremely expensive in Armenia. But that's one way. But is this sustainable? Well, if there's oil in Armenia, maybe it will be sustainable. In other words, if there's an extra source of high revenues. But otherwise, it's actually to try to develop those sectors. And there's no other way but to invest and help them grow, in my opinion. So that's my answer.
Yeah, thank you. Makes sense. David, you're muted.
And it's the touch screen doesn't work as well. Okay, never mind the touch screen. I'm trying to unmute you, Karen, and I can't. Okay.
I can unmute myself. Thank you.
Okay, good. You're done.
Thank you, everyone. Vahan Kerobyan, Papanosian, speakers, for the wonderful presentation, especially the professors and former economy minister. Very insightful and informative presentations that have potentially a link running through between all of them that was started by the initial introduction by Vahan Kerobyan when he overviewed the work of the ARPA Institute in Armenia. My name being Karen Tonoyan, I represent the Armenian Bar Association's Information Technology and Intellectual Property Law Committee. And since 2018, 2019, we've been working on improving Armenia's regulatory and legal framework for protecting intellectual property and bringing investments into Armenia. Vahan Kerobyan started with saying that Armenia is now a location where we have a clean room, where work on sensors and microchip is being worked on. There was a common thread between Vahan Kerobyan, Gevorkyan's, Indjikian's presentations that the high-tech sector, IT, and technology sectors are one of the locomotives of the economy. And notably and importantly, foreign direct investment is motivated by the ability to protect your investments and the innovations inside the country. As you know, in many sectors, 70 to 90% of the value of a company is in its intellectual property, whether it's in manufacturing, where they're producing, importing, or selling goods and products in Armenia, or if it's in sectors like design or information technology. With that context, I wanted to ask all the panelists if they had any insight on Armenia's IP policy moving forward. And I want to, as part of that, thank former Minister Kerobyan in collaborating with us over many years and allowing us to impact Armenia's new laws and regulations relating to IP and investments, and to Mr. Aleksandr Gevorkyan for advice along the way over the past few years. But if you could comment on that aspect and the impact of it on the economy, specifically IP value creation and the methods by which it generates investment into the country, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Any of you? Aleksandr?
Who goes first?
You go first.
I think, so this is for everything, but with IT, the moment I'm going to be able to just use my credit card and go online and pay for a hiking trip, that will tell me that IT is finally being integrated into Armenia's economy. Right now, you need to go find a terminal, put some cash, get a receipt, take a picture of the receipt, send it by WhatsApp, confirm, and so on. Too many steps for user experience. But more seriously, I think what matters is for IT sector to do two things. Number one is to be fully integrated into the economy itself, the economic structure. And for that, we again need the strategic development idea. Most of the IT work is outsourcing, really, or it's high-level outsourcing. Let's put it this way, because outsourcing sounds kind of diminutive, but no, it's serious work. It's massive, incredible work, but outsourcing in a way that it's done for the external market, and that doesn't really feed back into the spillover into the bigger economy. But then the second point is also to support internal development, and we have some. So we can use examples of CRISP. We can talk about which one, PixArt and others, right? And so on. But they're not the Samsung of Armenia, unfortunately. Although I use CRISP, if you don't know, that's a noise canceling software, incredible. And I use it in all of my non-Armenian presentations. And I do mention that this is what I'm using, and people are happy to discover because this is something we need. But again, it needs to be a broader scope development internally, but also for the international market. But there's hope in this. There's a 2015 or so, or maybe earlier, a World Bank study that compared entrepreneurship activity between Armenia and Georgia. There are two separate reports, and I wrote on that in the paper titled Legends of Caucasus, for romantic reasons, chose the title. But the findings of the report suggested that in the case of Georgia, most of the technological products were basically recycling of what had existed before. In the case of Armenia, almost 80 to 90% of value, the proposition was new. And within that, I don't remember the exact share, but the high share was actually new to the world. So that's important because that's what brings you into what I mentioned, the global value chains. But to me, there's no substitute for sort of a concerted and systematic approach. Free market works only after Rockefeller, Carnegie, and others had built the foundations for the economy.
May I follow up unless there are any other questions?
No, just to answer to this question about policies. It's policies are mainly about industrial policies, and the industrial policies have three elements: trade policy, fiscal policy, and financial policy. But of course, the numbers within each policy reflect the priority which the government ministries give to a given sector. And in this case, the given sector is IT services and IT-related maybe goods. Now, how much to give to which sector in terms of these incentives is the art of industrial policy for each case, basically. You cannot give a generalized answer here.
Right, but at the same time, we're not the ones who can decide which sectors to support, right? This has to be done at a very high level and systemically looking at the sort of contribution and productivity in each sector, what's missing, and actually deciding on what is the end goal. Is the end goal just to replicate what has been done somewhere else, or is the end goal to actually move forward and figure out what is not the comparative, but the competitive advantages? And it still
Yes.
remains, as you both said, the potential internally and the diaspora.
You know, when you say who decides, when people say market decide, I'm sometimes smiling. Market, futures market is a number of people who decide what is the price of futures of oil, for example. Okay, so that is the market. Here also, it should be interdisciplinary, interinstitutional sort of council, which will try to decide how much to give to which sector. At the end, it is a decision of well-informed people.
Right. There's another model, and that was the model of the Soviet times, which was the full employment, right? And this is where we're finding in the remote regions in Armenia, if you go to some places, and by the way, when I speak to some of the colleagues in the IT sector and I ask them, well, do you have any projects for Shushanik? And the answer is it's not on our map. Well, that's where you need to go to see what a concept of full employment actually is. And you would find in sort of abandoned villages, you find abandoned and broken up former factory sites. What was going on there? Well, in Soviet times, they were putting together optical devices because agriculture was very minimal in terms of productivity. But to keep people on the land, jobs were created that way, which is very, very interesting when you find these things out.
May I follow up with a question? I think you mentioned, Alek, about the innovations that the Armenian entrepreneurs were making.
Yep.
That highlights a certain point. We look at how Finland developed, or Korea and all that, particularly Finland. They invested heavily in education. You look at the history of Finland, you go back 30, 40, 50 years ago, it was not a very developed country. So it was no surprise that Finland developed after this huge investment in education. We can talk about Korea, we can talk about a lot of different countries. In Armenia, on the other hand, we have very little investment in education. Yeah, your slide in terms of salaries being low. Yeah, I was at YSU, Yerevan State University. I know what faculty got paid, and it's very little to what you would get paid relative to somebody who was in the US. You have physics professor there who gets paid probably less than % than a physics professor in the US. I'm not sure they're less productive. And so the question is, if there is no investment in education, then, this is not, somewhat in harmony with Ruben's point in terms of picking winners. You can pick education as a winner. I'm not sure you can pick which industries. That's more tricky, particularly in the case of Armenia, given the geographic and geopolitical limitations. But that is something missing in terms of that investment is not expensive. And that's where actually the government doesn't pick any winners and losers, but it's the educated labor force actually determines the end result. Anyway, I have a lot of other questions, but I'll take that offline. Any other questions?
But can I add to this? Because I think that's the essential point. And I'm not saying this because I'm in the academic world. Prior to that, I was 13 years in corporate world, and consulting enhanced my attitude towards inviting consultants like McKinsey. But, and I was saying the same thing back then, that the first sector you need to be investing in is your education sector. Because the bright, not seeing opportunities how to apply themselves will leave. We're living in a different world. JP Morgan and others were pulling things. These examples are often used, so I'm mentioning them. Were pulling things into the US because this was the place where they were creating new institutional conditions for new economy to develop. And they were heavily investing and once they get to a certain level into supporting education and such. So I think that should be the direction of spending first and foremost. And in the case of Armenia, I would dare to say that the return to investment will be faster and much more, will be higher if we are concerned about, well, education is a long-term project and things like that. I think there's a general thirst for knowledge and developing knowledge and actually staying in Armenia. What we should also appreciate is the relevance of culture and lifestyle. Security questions aside, this is something very important to consider, and that's with sort of having that complemented by a strongly educated workforce, I think is a win-win situation.
Any other questions?
Can I jump in?
Oh, yeah, please do. Absolutely.
I think, Aleksandr, it was you that said that, to paraphrase, basically this has to be a multi-pronged approach to building the economy. Certainly, the government needs to invest, whether it's education, which I'm strongly in favor of, or easing or building, building world trade agreements with various countries. But again, I really strongly feel that all of us in the diaspora have a very strong capability to make an impact in the country and build the manufacturing base. I'm all about that. You've made several references, Aleksandr, as well as you, David, to Korea and the chaebols and how they've built things. As I said earlier, I saw it there. I saw it in Taiwan. I saw it in Hong Kong. I saw it in 1984 when I first went into China. You have to build the light manufacturing base, keep the population in the country, and build everything else on top of that. We fortunately do have some of the higher end things such as the IT and whatnot, so we're half a step ahead of the game. But we have to do everything possible to keep the population in country, and that involves bringing in diasporan led manufacturing in all sectors and in the different marzes that we have. Why shouldn't Shushanik have factories? Why should only the north have the manufacturing? It has to be spread out, ideally in the border towns. We have to keep we have to grow the manufacturing sector, and we have to keep and build keep the population in place. That's the only way forward.
And we have examples of entire industries that jump-started and reached the world-class levels, and that's the wine industry, right? We all probably know this person moving from Italy and just basically, well, there are others, of course, but to me, that's an example, and just building the whole thing.
Yes.
And that's incredible, right? So these are the types of, I guess, examples that are needed to happen on a systemic level. So if I may also add, again, on the diaspora research, I've done at least 2 surveys, and there's consistent outcome between the two. I haven't published the results in the second one, but working on that. And that is that there's strong interest, there's strong attachment to Armenia by people who had never stepped foot in Armenia, right? And willingness to somehow support, but there's a concern in terms of, well, how do we do this, right? And this is where you need bureaucracy. Will always be there. Perception of corruption is always there. These things just don't go away. But this is where you need a local partner, right? And someone who will guide you, sort of, here's how you enter the country, and then we do work together, for example.
Exactly. New ventures need to be built on existing ventures. They have to see successes in order for them to follow up on it.
I got private messages, so I put a few things into the general chat if anyone is interested, and happy to stay in touch.
Vahan Indjikian, you have a question? Okay, go ahead.
I don't have a question. Okay. I have a statement to make. Hello.
Okay, if you could make it brief, go ahead.
I don't have a question. I have to make a statement.
Okay.
This panel was a kind of diagnosis of the economic situation in Armenia since 1991-92. I congratulate the panelists for their presentation, of which, as an academician, I evaluate highly their statements. What I propose is we should find out in which economic stage, there are stages in economic development, in which economic stage now is found Armenia. And accordingly, with the riches of the panelists we can state where we stand in the world, not in this Caucasus, as a country, as an economic country, as a political country. And in order to prepare that, both panelists, academic panelists, our friends Ruben and Aleksandr, presented documents which are very, very important to find out how to proceed. The how to proceed is to create an organization that can execute the recommendations for an economic development in Armenia. I don't have anything else to add, but I would like to tell that with my experience in banking, in central banking, in consultation in the CIS countries in 1992 to create central banks in these countries, I can be one of the best head to organize such an organization to execute in which economic stage we stand, Armenia. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I guess time is running out, and we are almost two hours in. I appreciate everybody's comments, especially the panelists, Aleksandr, Ruben, and Vahan. Vahan had to leave, unfortunately. Also, the comments by Ashot, Nazaret, and Karen, and also Mr. Bulukian. We definitely need to organize ourselves as a diasporan expert organizations, different organizations, just like ARPA Institute is doing, ASAF is doing. So if you want to contribute in any way and would like to contact us to form an organization or to form a committee or to do anything to help Armenia out, we're ready to listen to you and help as much as we can. Our next panel discussion will be on the cybersecurity of Armenia, especially on Starlink, which is a completely different satellite system that will essentially ensure the security of not only the internet, but also communications and all the cyber functions of Armenia. So you'll be welcome to join. It will be on the 1st of September at 11 a.m. You will receive our emails. If we don't have your email address, please provide it to us. And also, I would like to ask you to please donate if you think that we are doing a helpful job for Armenia. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.